have 2 chapters left here in the book of John, and I was thinking that we might do Philippians after John. Thinking about, I'm excited for that. Philippians is really a good continuation of the book of John. John 13, Jesus washes the disciples' feet, and he says, I did this as an example to you, so you go wash other people's feet. And if you do that, you will be blessed. You'll have joy if you serve other people. Very counterintuitive in our culture. If you serve other people, you'll have joy. That's really the theme of Philippians, is the joy of serving other people. So I think that'll be good. But we have to finish John first. So we've been talking about the resurrection of Jesus Christ. We've gone through Jesus' life, his public ministry. He proclaims himself to the nation Israel, and the nation Israel rejects him. They say, we don't want that. We like Judaism, what we've always had. They reject him, and we saw his arrest and his trials. We went through his death in John chapter 19, and now we're to John chapter 20, the resurrection. So we're talking about the resurrection of Jesus Christ, and I wanted to spend just a few minutes before we get into the text. We actually have a shorter text today, so I thought instead of getting done early, I'll just talk about something else for a little bit of time. But I want to spend just a couple minutes talking about 2 things based on kind of my reading about the resurrection and about current views of the resurrection, and you as students at a university and kind of where our culture is today. I wanted to just talk about 2 things real briefly. And the first thing is the importance of the resurrection. Throughout history, the debate has always been, did Jesus rise from the dead, yes or no? That's always been the debate. And if you say, yes, Jesus rose from the dead, then you're a Christian. The Bible's true, and I'm a Christian. If you say, no, he didn't rise from the dead, you're not a Christian. I don't believe the Bible is true. But from reading around, it seems like that debate is shifted in our day. Among Christians, what people are asking is, does it matter if Jesus rose from the dead or not? There's a lot of Christians today who say it doesn't matter if Jesus rose from the dead. That's not important to our religion as Christians. So I want you to understand the resurrection is tremendously important. It is the cornerstone of our faith in Jesus Christ. They talk about watershed issues. Have you heard of watershed issues? You hear about those? Watershed issues are issues where you think of a roof, looks like this, and if rain falls on this side of the roof, imagine a roof. Should have brought one up here to help the illustration. Imagine a roof. If rain falls on this side, it flows into this gutter over here. If it falls on this side, it goes into this gutter over here. So it might seem like a small issue, but it's the cornerstone of everything else. And the resurrection is a watershed issue. If you do not believe in the resurrection of Jesus Christ, you are not a Christian. The Bible has no basis for you. You shouldn't believe it. So why is the resurrection important? We talked about this a little bit last time. But first off, it proved who Jesus was. Remember, when Jesus came, he claimed something. He didn't just come and say, I'm going to just be a good person. He made claims while he was here. He said, I am God. I am the Son of God. He made himself equal with God. He also said, Matthew chapter 16, verse 21, it says, from that time Jesus began to show his disciples he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, chief priests, and scribes, that he must be killed, and on the 3rd day raised to life. So Jesus told people, I'm going to rise from the dead. So if he did not rise from the dead, he is a liar. There's no way he can be God if he did not rise from the dead. So when he raised from the dead, he proved who he was. He's legitimate. My claims are true that he made. And while proving who he was, he also proved that his payment for sins were acceptable to God. That his propitiation was successful. You know, if Jesus were a normal human, his death would have no more meaning than when you or I die someday. And there's been tens of thousands of people who've been crucified over the years. There was 2 who was crucified right next to Jesus. So how do we know that Jesus' death meant something more than all these other people who were crucified? The reason is he rose from the dead. Romans chapter 1, verse 4. It says, Jesus was born of a descendant of David according to the flesh, was declared the Son of God with power by the resurrection from the dead. So he proved who he was, and with that he proved that our sins are paid for. So if he did not rise from the dead, he's not God. His death paid for no one's sins. And number 3, we're going to turn to 1 Corinthians 15. We're going to kind of see where Paul takes this takes this argument a little bit. But he also proved that death is not the end. He proved that there is life after death. A lot of people, you talk around with people on campus, a lot of people think that death is the end of all things. You die and you're gone forever. So how do we know that this is not the case? Look at 1 Corinthians 15, we'll start in verse 3. I delivered to you of first importance what I also received, that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, and that He was buried, and that He was raised again on the third day according to the Scriptures. So Paul considers it of first importance that you understand He died and He rose from the dead. And that He appeared, verse 5, to Cephas, then to the 12. He appeared to more than 500 brethren at one time, most of whom remain until now, but some have fallen asleep. Then He appeared to James, then to all the apostles, and last of all, as to one untimely born, He appeared to me also. So we're going to look at this a little bit. But Jesus, the resurrection of Jesus, had a lot of eyewitnesses. Not just one or two or three or four or five, but hundreds of people saw the risen Jesus Christ. So we'll look at that. Down in verse 12. Now if Christ is preached that He has been raised from the dead, how do some among you say there is no resurrection from the dead? So some of the people in the church at Corinth were saying that when you die, that's it. There's no resurrection. There's nothing after that. That is the end. So verse 13. It says, if there's no resurrection of the dead, not even Christ has been raised. So if Christ had not been raised from the dead, if there's no resurrection, then Christ hasn't been raised. There's nothing more. Verse 14. The result of that, if Christ has not been raised, our preaching is vain. Your faith also is vain. So if Jesus Christ has not been raised from the dead, there is no Christianity. Your faith is vain. Verse 15, he says, moreover, we are even found to be false witnesses of God, because we testified against God that He raised Christ, whom He did not raise, if in fact the dead are not raised. So Paul says, we've said that Jesus Christ rose from the dead. We've said that we saw Him. So if He hasn't been raised from the dead, all the New Testament authors are liars. John, what we're going through, he's a liar if Jesus was not raised from the dead. So you see, if you start taking out and you say it's not important if you believe Jesus raised from the dead, you throw out the New Testament. It doesn't mean anything. All the authors are liars. Why would you believe any of it? So I don't really understand how Christians can do that. It's very important that we understand the resurrection of Jesus Christ. So that's the first thing. It's a complete side note, but it's pertinent to what we're talking about. So it's important that we believe Jesus rose from the dead. The second thing is I was reading and hearing different people's views. I don't know why I do that. It's a waste of time, but I do it anyways. But I want you to understand the absolute truth of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Our culture has changed this as well. It used to be that there are true things and false things. There's right things and wrong things. There's real things and there's fake things. But in our culture, maybe you've experienced this in some of your classes or talking with people, there isn't right and wrong anymore. There isn't real and make-believe. People say, well, you have your truth, I have my truth, and you can't tell me I'm wrong, I can't tell you that you're wrong, we're both right. I remember when I shared the gospel with a coworker once, not at Voss, but at Gallup when I used to work there. Shared the gospel with one there, and he said, oh, that's great for you. And I said, well, no, you understand that I'm saying if you don't believe this, you're on your way to hell. This is not great. I mean, it's great for me, it's not great for you. And he said, well, you have your belief, I have my belief. And he didn't understand. But we have to understand, this is important as Christians. There is reality outside of you that you have no control over. There is a reality. History, for example, is a reality outside of you. Alexander the Great, my favorite historical figure. One of my favorite. He conquered the known world by 327 BC. And nothing about you 2,300 years later can change that. Someone can say, well, I don't think Alexander the Great really did that. No one cares. Alexander the Great doesn't care that you don't believe that. The people he conquered don't care that you don't believe that. It doesn't change anything. So if you understand there's a reality, there's truth, that means that some things are false. So if you're wise, which I hope that you are, rather than saying whatever I think is true, you'll look for what is real, what is true, and you'll change your thinking to be in line with that truth. So that's what John has written this book to do. It's to get you, I've written these things so that you might believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God. And, belief has kind of lost some of its meaning in our day and age. In fact, I was watching Sesame. Well, I wasn't watching Sesame Street. Kids were watching Sesame Street, and a song came on, Believe in Yourself, Believe in Yourself. I'm not going to sing it because it's a dumb song. But believe in yourself. And that's not what John's talking here. People use believe. I was talking with Aaron, a book I was reading. Whatever the mind can conceive, it can achieve. If you just believe things. That's not the type of belief John is talking about here. He's not just saying believe something, believe some idea. It's stupid to believe an idea if that idea is not true. We use the example because it's a good one. If you believe that you can fly, you can believe it with your whole heart. You can be passionate about it 100%. And if you're 100% believe that, you might get on the roof and jump off. Then I 100% believe I can fly, and you will fall. Gravity doesn't know about your beliefs. So you will fall. And so John doesn't want us to just believe some idea. He wants our minds to be in line with the facts, the reality that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God. This event actually happened, and whether or not you believe doesn't change that. That's what he wants you to do. That's the purpose of the book of John. So anyways, those are two side notes. Starting the timer now, that doesn't count towards my time. But we get to John chapter 20, so you can turn back over there now. That's what John wants for you. Believe that Jesus is the Christ, that he rose from the dead, died for our sins. So John chapter 20, John is proving that Jesus rose from the dead, which proves he's the Christ, which is the whole point of this book. So just to review what we looked at last time, we've gone through some of the proofs of the resurrection. Verse 1, the women come to the tomb, and the focus here is on Mary Magdalene. And she's going to be our focus tonight. She is the first one who sees Jesus risen from the dead. So she is the first eyewitness of the resurrected Jesus. But in verse 1, the women go to the tomb. Mary Magdalene gets to the tomb, and the stone was gone. The other Gospels tell us this stone was very heavy. Some estimate that it was 2 tons heavy. Ben, I don't think he's here. He can deadlift 500 pounds. But even he couldn't get this stone out of the way. So it was moved by a supernatural earthquake. This is proof number 1. That stone being moved, the way it's worded here in John, it was taken out of place. That's not something you can just go do. You can't just say, hey guys, let's move this 4,000 pound stone over here. So a supernatural earthquake opened the grave. Jesus couldn't have opened it from the inside. It's not going to happen. 4,000 pound stones. That's proof number 1 we looked at. So then Mary sees the tomb is open. Verse 2, she goes to see Simon Peter and the other disciples. And the disciples were told from the other Gospels they don't believe her. But Peter and John, verse 3 through 5, they think, well, we better at least check this out. So Peter and John run to the tomb. John gets there first because he's faster. And as I was thinking about it more, I think this is really important for John, who's writing these things for us, is he can testify that Peter didn't tamper with the body either. John was the first one there, and he says, I got there and no one had messed with anything. Peter came later, so even Peter, if you don't trust Peter, he couldn't have even done anything to the body. But they get there, John kind of waits outside and doesn't want to go in yet. They don't know that Jesus has risen from the dead, and you don't just kind of run into tombs usually, it's creepy. But Peter, verse 6 and 7, Peter, a little more impetuous, he runs right in. He says, let's see what's going on here. Don't wait out here. Let's get on in there. So verse 6 and 7, they see the linens. And they notice that the tomb was empty. And verse 9 of John chapter 20 says, verse 8, so the other disciple who had first come to the tomb also entered. He saw and believed. For as yet they did not understand the scripture that he must rise again from the dead. So John sees just the physical evidence. He sees the tomb is empty. He sees that the linens are still there. These are expensive linens that any grave robber would have taken. And he believes. Well, I think Jesus must have risen from the dead. Maybe he thought back, hey, Jesus said he was going to raise from the dead. Usually when he said things, they ended up happening. Maybe this happened too. John starts to put things together. But Peter does not yet believe it. The other Gospels tell us that Peter went away wondering about these things. So far we've had 4 proofs. We're going to pick up there in verse 10 today. We've had 4 proofs. The stone is taken out of the way. The tomb is empty. And that would be Christianity sweeps the nation, the Jews are trying to crush it. Wouldn't have just producing the body been a great way to shut down Christianity? The Jews would have loved to produce the body of Jesus Christ to kill Christianity, but they couldn't because there was no body to produce. The tomb was empty. The linens are still there, which kind of rules out grave robbers. You're a bad grave robber if there's expensive linens and you unwrap the body, take just the body and leave the linens. Dead bodies are not worth anything. So that's another proof. In verse 9 we saw the Old Testament scriptures are another proof. The Old Testament says, Psalm chapter 16, you will not allow your Holy One to suffer decay. The Messiah's body is not going to decay. So if Jesus had not raised from the dead, he would be ruled out as the Messiah. So those are our proofs. And we're going to look at two other proofs today. But the main one being eyewitness testimony. We're going to look just at the first eyewitness because I jabbered so long. But we're going to look just at Mary Magdalene, the first eyewitness of the resurrected Christ. So verse 10. So the disciples went away again to their homes. So again, Peter goes away wondering what is going on here. Where is Jesus' body? John believes that Jesus rose, but apparently he wasn't super confident in it because he doesn't tell Peter. I would think that you would at least let him know, hey, maybe he rose from the dead, but John kind of keeps it to himself at first at least. And he goes home too, probably to think through what's happened. I was thinking, I try to put myself in their situation, maybe pray about it and try to figure out what's going on. But Mary Magdalene goes back to the tomb. And verse 11, Mary was standing outside the tomb weeping. So Peter and John go home, Mary goes back to the tomb, and she wants to know what's happened. I want to get some answers. I was thinking, another side note, this is a lot of side notes. Another side note, this is totally how Alyssa and I would be. I would be like, let's go home, let's take a nap, it'll work itself out, what you gonna do? Something will turn up, let's take a nap. Alyssa would say, no, let's go to the tomb, let's figure out what's going on here. Somebody will show up, somebody will give us answers. And so Mary Magdalene goes to the tomb to figure out where is Jesus' body? What's going on here? Verse 11, so as she wept, she stooped and looked into the tomb. And she saw two angels in white sitting, one at the head and one at the feet, where the body of Jesus had been lying. So Mary stoops and looks in, and she confirms that second proof, that the tomb is empty. So now we've had three people who've seen this empty tomb. And actually empty is not completely accurate, because verse 12, there's two angels in there. So not empty, but Jesus' body was not there. But there's two angels sitting there. The angels hadn't manifested themselves to Peter and John, but they're here now. And there's some debate as Mary doesn't seem to be too surprised by the angels. You would be thinking, well, that's notable. Why isn't she alarmed? Or why is she just talking to him like nothing's going on? But if you think about it, their appearance is probably similar to humans. It says they're clothed in white. In Acts chapter 1, you remember when Jesus goes into heaven and two men clothed in white, maybe the same two angels, we're not told, but they stand next to the disciples and say, why do you look up? He's going to come down the same way that he went up. And the disciples there too, they don't seem all that startled by it. So maybe these angels looked a lot like humans, dressed in white. So she doesn't think too much out. Probably the most surprising thing is, why are you in the tomb? Why are you in here? But also remember too that another possibility is angels weren't that uncommon to them. In fact, Mary Magdalene knew Mary had seen an angel, so it's not unheard of. So she might have been surprised, whatever the case. But you can call this number 5 proof if you want. Angels in the tomb prove that Jesus rose from the dead. Angels being there proves it's not grave robbers, it is a work of God. Verse 13. So the angels said to her, the two angels dressed in white, woman, why are you weeping? And remember, they're not necessarily looking for an answer here. It seems like a mild rebuke in the question. Why are you weeping? There's no reason to be weeping. And remember, woman is not that sounds super rude. It's like I think angels would be polite. That's not super rude. Woman just means ma'am. So it's respectful. Ma'am, why are you weeping? Why are you weeping? You shouldn't be weeping. And it kind of makes you wonder what the angels think about all that's going on here. Remember 1 Peter chapter 1 says that angels long to look into salvation? It's like they don't understand. They don't have the same sin like we do. They don't have the same weaknesses that we do. they could be legitimately confused here. Why are you weeping? There's no reason to be weeping. Jesus just saved the whole planet. Why are you weeping here? But she answers them, verse 13. She said to them, because they've taken away my Lord, and I do not know where they have laid him. And for Jews, reverence of the body was very important to them. So it wouldn't be out of character. If you wanted to dishonor Jesus, yeah, let's take his body out, move it somewhere else, dishonor the body. But again, you can see even in her sentence why the angels would think, well, this isn't consistent. She says, they've taken my Lord, and I don't know where they've laid him. So she calls him Lord. She understands that, yeah, this is my Lord. I think she understands that he is God. But grave robbers got a hold of him. So it's out of control now. Grave robbers have taken him. I don't know where they've laid him. That's just how people dealt with idols. Remember back in the Old Testament where they'd make an idol and worship it as their God, and then it would start to fall over. Oh no, stop it, it's going to fall over. I was like, that's not a God who's in control. And that's kind of what Mary's thinking right now. Yeah, he's God, he's my Lord, but those grave robbers, they've ruined his plan. So she believed in Jesus, but not enough. She didn't have full belief in all that he could do. We think, yeah, that Mary, she's so dumb. How could she possibly do that? But we do that same thing every day. God is God. He promises to work things. Romans 8:28, he promises to work all things together for good to those who love him and are called according to his purpose. But you don't understand. I'm late for work today. That's terrible. I'm anxious. This is out of your control. No, God is in control. Matthew chapter 6 says, when you worry, you have little faith. You're not believing that God is who he says he is. You're not believing his promises. And that's what Mary's doing here. So he's God, but there's no way he's in control of this situation. And I wonder, again, what the angels are thinking. Is she serious? She really doesn't know what's going on here? Verse 14. But when she had said this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there. But she did not know that it was Jesus. So she's talking to the angels in the tomb. She hears something behind her. You get that feeling when there's somebody near you. So she turns around and she doesn't recognize Jesus. So she sees Jesus, doesn't recognize him. And it is dark. It's early morning. She's been weeping. Verse 15. Remember that weeping is a deep wailing. It's not just but this is a wailing. Mascara clear down the face. This is weeping. So she, through the tears, might not be able to recognize who Jesus is. You can't see him. It's also possible that glorified bodies, Jesus now has a glorified body, are hard to recognize at first glance. We don't know exactly, 1 Corinthians 15 says our glorified bodies are like our current body, but they're also different. On the road to Emmaus, in Luke chapter 24, Jesus is going to walk to Emmaus with two disciples, and it says that they're kept from recognizing Jesus along the way. So they don't see it at first. And this is speculation. But maybe, it's maybe like the difference between a child and an adult. There's similarities, but you can't quite tell it's them. But then when you look at them, you say, oh, you're that person I knew back when he was 6 years old. Remember? You know what I'm talking about? I won't go any further. I think you know what I'm talking about. You're a smart group. But she doesn't recognize him at first, whatever the reason. She assumes he's the gardener, as we'll see in verse 15. But I do want you to note that, Mary is not a gullible person. She's not superstitious. There's a theory that's spread around that the reason Christianity spread was people were so superstitious and they're so unscientific and they're so stupid back then. With our science now, that would never happen because we are smart now. No, Mary was not that different than we are. First off, it doesn't take a genius to know it's impossible to raise from the dead. You don't have to have a science degree to know that that's scientifically impossible. They had that science back then. Dead people stay dead. So she was not gullible. She was not looking for Jesus. She hears somebody behind her. She doesn't think, I bet that's Jesus. She's skeptical. In fact, really, she's the first skeptic of the resurrection. Jesus is standing right by her, and she doesn't. And he said he's going to raise from the dead, and she doesn't think it's him. She thinks it's the gardener. Verse 15. Jesus said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping? Whom are you seeking?" Again, we have a mild rebuke here, and I think there's significance in the way Jesus asked this. First, he says, "Why are you weeping?" just like the angels did. Gentle rebuke. You don't need to be weeping. And I think he answers, why you don't need to be weeping with his second question. Why are you weeping? You don't need to weep because whom are you seeking? Think about who it is that you're looking for. Think about it. Put two and two together. Why are you weeping? Who are you seeking? So again, Mary believed in him, but she thought far too small of him. Just like back with Lazarus. Remember with Lazarus in John chapter 11, where they called Jesus and they said, our brother is sick, come quick. Jesus waited 3 extra days, and then he died. And then Jesus shows up and they said, oh, if you'd been here while he was sick, he could still be alive. But now that he's dead, there's nothing you can do. They thought too little of Jesus and what he could do. His power as God. So verse 15. Why are you weeping? Whom are you seeking? Supposing him to be the gardener, verse 15, she said to him, Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have laid him, and I will take him away. So Mary thinks that this is the gardener. She thinks maybe he's been given orders to take the body somewhere else. Maybe they needed this tomb for somebody else, so they took the body somewhere. And she's not thinking super rationally. She tells him, tell me where it is, and I'll go take it away. It's like, well, how are you going to carry a body away by yourself? Where are you going to put him? But she's in mourning. She's not thinking super rationally about it. She just said, please, I want to find him so badly. Then verse 16. Jesus said to her, Mary. He says Miriam. That's the Hebrew name Mary. And it's probably the same way that he said it 100 times to her before. But when he says it that way, he says Miriam, she recognized him immediately. Verse 16, she turned and said to him in Hebrew, Rabboni, which means teacher. So John knows his readers might not know Hebrew. Thank you, John. We don't. Mary calls him Rabboni, which is it's an affectionate term for teacher. So like a very personal teacher, one-on-one teacher, tutor. But she recognizes him. The reality she sees changes, and instantly her sadness and despair turn to delight. That's the power of truth. Right? When you start to see things clearly, it completely changes who you are. 1 second she's in complete despair, the next second full of delight. Jesus is alive. So she sees he's alive, she wraps herself around him. And you can understand this. This is what you might do if someone you loved you thought was dead and now they're alive. You can understand. You'd wrap yourself around them. Say, I'm so happy to see you. I'm so excited to see you. I missed you. Verse 17, Jesus said to her, stop clinging to me. Stop clinging to me. This is a command. Stop doing what you're doing right now. So again, Mary's wrapped herself around Jesus, and Jesus says, stop doing what you're doing. Stop clinging to me. Well, that's kind of weird, isn't it? You'd think that he would embrace her back. But he gives his reason, verse 17. He says, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. It's like, well, thanks for clearing that up. Now, this is a very highly debated passage. There's a lot of different ideas about why Jesus doesn't want her to cling to him right then. One author I read said this is the most debated passage in the New Testament. I don't know if that's true or not. But he says, don't cling to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. Instead of clinging to me, verse 17, go to my brethren, the disciples, and say to them, I ascend to my Father and your Father, and my God and your God. So don't cling to me because I have not ascended yet. So the ascension is going to be in Acts chapter 1 when Jesus goes up into heaven. It's about 40 days after his resurrection. So he tells her, don't cling to me. I haven't gone up into heaven yet. And I take it, if you want to talk more about this later, I'm open to it. But I take it that Mary was thinking this is the second coming. This is when Jesus is going to start his kingdom. Remember what he had said back in John chapter 14? He said, I'm leaving you, but I'm going to come again to receive you with me, that where I am, there you will be also. So Mary sees Jesus raised from the dead, and she thinks, he's back. Now I'm going to go into eternity with him forever. This is great. We're here. I think this is the same thing the disciples in Acts chapter 1. Remember what they asked Jesus? They say, so is it now that you're going to you're going to restore the kingdom to Israel? So they're ready for heaven to start right now. Jesus says, no. Things are just beginning. I have to ascend to the Father first. So you're clinging to me now, but when I ascend to the Father, you'll have an even better relationship with me. Remember back to, we're getting a lot of good John review in here. John chapter 16, Jesus says, it's better for you that I go away. For after I go, I will send the Spirit, that he who was with you will now be in you. So don't cling to me now. I'm not here to stay this time. The Spirit's coming, and someday I will return again, give you a glorified body, and then you can cling to me. So I take it that's what he's saying here to Mary. So he's saying, don't cling to me. And he tells her, instead, you have a job to do. Don't cling to me. You have work that you need to do as a believer in Jesus Christ. And really, Mary is the first missionary here. She's going to tell the good news about Jesus Christ being raised from the dead. Jesus tells her, go to my brethren, the disciples, and tell them that I'm going to ascend to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God. And he calls the disciples brethren there in verse 17. And this is the first time that he's called the disciples brothers. If you look through the rest of the book of John, they've been slaves, they've been called friends, they've been called disciples, they've never been called brothers up until now. Because of Jesus Christ's completed work on the cross, we become children of God. We become brothers of Christ. Hebrews chapter 2 verse 11 says, because of Christ's work on the cross, he's not ashamed to call us brethren. So he wants Mary to tell them, I'm leaving to my Father and to my God, but he's now also your Father and your God. So we are part of the same relationship that Jesus has with the Father. So he's obviously unique. He's the only begotten Son of God. But he's our brother. We become part of that relationship. We're part of a divine family. We are siblings in a divine family. And he's going to have the disciples carry on his ministry to the world. It's verse 18. I think we'll probably close here and pick up in a couple weeks after here. But Mary Magdalene came announcing to the disciples, I have seen the Lord, and that he had said these things to her. So again, this is our fifth and final proof, and probably the greatest proof. We're going to spend the next time talking about the eyewitnesses of this event. So as you start to see these eyewitnesses who say, we saw the risen Christ, you start to deny the resurrection. You have to say, not only is Jesus a liar, but you have to say, well, Mary Magdalene is a liar. Later you have to say John is a liar. You have to say Peter is a liar. All these people are lying about what they saw. And we'll pick up with that next time. Not just one eyewitness, not just 2 or 3, but hundreds of eyewitnesses. And again, not gullible witnesses, but skeptical ones. Matthew says that this time even they didn't believe that it was Jesus. Thomas is going to be a great example. He doesn't believe even when 11 people all tell him, hey, we saw him. He says, I'm not going to believe until I put my finger into the holes in his hand. Very skeptical, not stupid at all. And then to compound it even, these people were killed, beaten, tortured for saying that Jesus rose from the dead. But they still said it. So in closing, and we'll pick up there next time, but in closing, do you believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God? That's been our theme in the book of John. I'm not going to stop it now. But if you don't believe that Jesus is God, if you don't believe these things are true, how do you respond to the resurrection of Jesus Christ? You can't just say, well, I don't feel like it happened. It's good that you believe that. I don't feel like it happened. How do you respond to the proof offered by these eyewitnesses? By John, by Mary Magdalene. And if you do believe, is your life transformed by this truth? If Jesus rose from the dead, that changes everything about our lives. There's no way we can live the way we lived before we knew that Jesus rose from the dead. We can't live the same way. The resurrected King is resurrecting me. It changes who we are as people. And as you go through the New Testament, so many passages, so many truths are based on the fact that Jesus Christ rose from the dead. Colossians chapter 3 says, if you've been raised up with Christ, keep seeking the things above where Christ is seated at the right hand of God. Ephesians 2 says you've been made alive together with Christ. Do you believe these things? And if you do, it changes your life. So we'll go ahead and close with that. We'll pick up there in 2 weeks. Don't forget the Christmas party next week, 6:30 in the Unity Room. It's a fun room. Let's go ahead and close with a word of prayer. Dear Father in heaven, thank you for this day. Thank you for the eyewitnesses that you've given to us of your death and of your resurrection. Just ask that you would help to increase our faith, help us to believe more and more the truths of your word, and help them to have more and more of an impact on who we are, on our character, on our day-to-day life, on our relationships with other people, on our purpose in life, and just every aspect of who we are as people. Just ask that you would bless our night tonight. In Jesus' name, amen.